Father, in all these prayers that these men and women have been sharing tonight, there's been one theme that's kind of just been unifying them all. And that's that we desire for you to be glorified, God. Not only do we desire for you to be glorified, but we desire to be the ones who help glorify you. So as we go into your word, God, please shape us tonight. The passage we're going through is not a passage that a lot of people do deep dive Bible studies into, and it might not be a passage that immediately jumps out with all this relevance for application. But God, it is your word, and you did inspire it. And therefore we want to study it and we want to be shaped by it. And so help us first understand the passage in its original context, but also, God, let this study that we partake in tonight be something that helps construct us into the type of people you want us to be. Because that's what we want to do, God. And we're not perfect, and we often stray, and we often get distracted, and we often focus on so many other things, God. But right here, right now, as we go into your word, may your Spirit guide us and give us focus and give us discernment and give us a mind that is free from distractions so that we can truly just hone in on you and on your glory. So that by the time we pray at the end of this night, we'll be better equipped to go out and live for that glory. It's in your name we pray. Amen. All right. Today we are in 1 Kings chapter 2. And just as a reminder, because I get comments on this almost every week, try to speak loud if you ever speak up. Because people can hear me a lot because I just naturally project and I've got the microphone a little bit closer to me. But people almost every week comment and say that they want to hear y'all as well. So if you speak up, just speak up. Project, right? Do it for their sake so that they can hear you because your words are precious to them as well. But today we're in 1 Kings chapter 2. It's another long chapter just like last week. And I really had a tough time coming up with a title for this chapter. I imagine that whenever I name it on YouTube, I'll call it something like Solomon Establishes His Kingdom or something like that. But for the sake of us today, I actually called it The Deaths of a Whole Bunch of Important People. Because really, that's kind of what this whole chapter is. Really, the first half of the chapter is dealing with the death of David. And then the back half of the chapter is the establishment of Solomon's kingdom. But it's really focused on all the people he had to kill in order to establish his kingdom. And before we actually hopped in tonight, I wanted to stop and I wanted to read a really kind of extended little quote from a commentary that I've been reading. I like to read commentaries and stuff on the books that we're going through, especially some stuff in the Old Testament, just because I love studying the Old Testament. I want us to understand the Old Testament well, but sometimes people are very lazy in how they go about it, and so I like to just read some commentaries just to kind of make sure that I'm reading the right things into this. And I wanted to read this one quote from this one commentary I've been reading, mainly because he actually gives a little bit of personal reflection on the amount of violence that we're going to see in this chapter. Not because this violence is any more severe than anything we saw in 1 and 2 Samuel or anything more severe than we saw in Judges. By far, it's not going to be like that. But the context in which this is found, the violence that is talked about in these chapters is almost presented as a good and righteous thing. And so I wanted to read this little commentary to just see what he says about it so that we can actually look at it through that lens as we go through the passage, right? And so this is what he has to say. 1 and 2 Kings and other portions of Scripture endorse violence in certain settings. And as Boersma argues, that's another commentator dude, there's an eradicable element of violence in the atonement, right? Talking about the atonement of Jesus Christ. For Scripture, though violence is an intrusion in an originally peaceful world, violence may be redemptive. In our current post-lapsarian and pre-eschatological condition, that's basically just saying like post-lapsarian means after the fall and pre-eschatological means before the end, right? So living in between the fall and the restoration. In our current time, violence is not only at times a necessary evil, but also at times it can be a positive good. 1 Kings chapter 2 gives a particularly important gloss on this claim by showing that in the post-lapsarian and pre-eschatological world, violence is necessary for establishing the conditions of social flourishing that the Bible describes as peace. And remember, Solomon's name means peace. Violent execution of justice is one of the means for establishing conditions of new creation. As Boersma puts it, God's hospitality requires violence just as his love necessitates wrath. And divine violence is a way in which God strives towards an eschatological situation of pure hospitality. As 1 Kings chapter 2 makes clear, violence, like wrath, is not God's monopoly. Solomon serves as a minister of wrath to establish an Israel that is a preview of the continual rejoicing and pure hospitality of the eschaton, the end times. Yet the violent establishment of Solomon is but a faint shadow of the greater Solomon, who establishes a new creation, first of all by suffering violence rather than deploying it. Right? So one thing I just wanted to point out there is that you're going to read this and you're going to look at the story and you're going to kind of be like, this is just terrible. Right? Solomon's being presented as this great guy, but he's having to kill people left and right. And I think what this commentator is rightly pointing out is that things aren't always as black and white as we would like them to be. We live in a sinful, broken world, and sometimes in that sinful, broken world, God actually is endorsing violent activity in order to redeem the world, because you have to kick out the adversary, right? And this is just part of our beliefs, right? We don't like talking about it. Nowadays as Christians, we don't like talking about whenever the Israelites conquered Canaan, because we have to talk about all the people they killed. And people get confused and they're saying, is God a moral monster? Who is God to tell the people of Israel to do this? But I think what the commentator is pointing out here is that this is the theology of God, right? Whenever Jesus shows back up, he's not going to be the meek and mild Jesus that we saw in the Gospels. He's going to be a guy who shows up with fire in his eyes and a flaming sword, and he's going to destroy his enemies. Because in the post-lapsarian world, in a world filled with violence, the only way to destroy evil is by destroying it. Right? And so violence actually becomes a necessity in order to produce restoration. Right? And so whenever we look at this, there's going to be things that make you uncomfortable, because you're going to look at Solomon and he's supposed to be this great guy. And you're going to look at David on his deathbed and he's going to be suggesting certain things and you're going to be like, whoa, David, what the heck? And I've had some really godly mentors in my life who have talked about David on his deathbed and said, man, this guy, he just was not being very godly right here. Whereas I'm going to argue that David actually was being godly in the things that he's requesting Solomon to do. Oftentimes, it's our own uncomfortability with godliness. Like, usually we equate godliness to worldly expectations of morality. And one thing that we see, especially in 1st and 2nd Samuel, 1st and 2nd Kings, is that sometimes godliness doesn't always look like worldly morality, right? Sometimes the people who are doing the godly thing look evil in the eyes of the world. Right? And I'm not saying that you should go out and try to do evil things. I'm just saying that sometimes it's a little bit more difficult than simply a black and white decision that we try to often put it into. Right? And so I'm just trying to encourage us to be discerning as we go into this, rather than just immediately thinking the worst of these people. We have to realize that this is people who are in charge of God's holy people in the midst of a broken world. And that's never an easy thing to navigate. That being said, real quick, so that we can hop into this, what was the context? What did we cover last week?
We went over, it was Adonijah, and he wanted to become king for himself, and he wanted to have his own party, and he invited so many people, but he left out the mighty men and people that were closer to David, because he could have been afraid that they would tell David about the party, and then just kind of like David, just naturally just became king. Solomon became king, and then Adonijah was like, oh no, and then Adonijah started to get on the altar, hold the two horns, and started to get kind of like sad, and he was just telling Solomon how sorry he was, and Solomon's like, just get up, go home, all good, just go home.
Yeah, and that's where we left off, right? So all of the last chapter was really setting up, like, really, 1 Kings picks up right where 2 Samuel left off, right? 2 Samuel left off with David getting older to where he's having to retire from the battlefield and stuff like that. And we saw Absalom's conspiracy, Sheba's rebellion. We saw Joab kind of beginning to doubt David a little bit. 1 Kings picks up right there, right? To where we do have another rebellion being formed, but basically is David's fourth in line, like it's his fourth son. Two of his sons have been killed. Seemingly his third son probably died sometime early on during this. His fourth son is Adonijah, who would reasonably be the next one in line for the throne, and he wants to become king. He wants to make himself king, and so he just kind of does what Absalom did, but he just doesn't do it as well, right? To where he goes down into a valley, he just tries to coronate himself, and Bathsheba and Nathan, they go before David, they tell him what's up, and David says, that's not going to happen. And he basically just really quickly establishes it so that Solomon is the future king. And so where we kind of left off at the end of last week is we have what we would call a co-regency, right? To where David is not yet dead, and so he is still king, but he has already appointed Solomon as the new king, right? So technically there are two kings in Israel at the same time, father and son, and it's kind of like a passing of the torch, right? So rather than David dying and then Solomon becoming king, David has established Solomon as king before his death, so that they're kind of co-regents together until his death. And we got to see Solomon's very first words, and his very first words were basically an act of grace, right? Where basically Adonijah, like Maverick pointed out, is clinging to the altar, and he's begging for his life. And Solomon says, bring him before me, and basically says, if this guy proves himself worthy, I'll spare him. But if he acts corruptly, then he's going to die, right? So he has every right to kill him right then and there, but instead he chooses to be gracious, and he chooses to extend mercy to his brother rather than just killing him. That story is going to continue into this, and just as a spoiler alert, things are not going to turn out well for a lot of the people who conspired against David and against Solomon. So let's get into the chapter because we've got a lot to cover. Take it away, Sean.
Then David's time to die drew near, so he commanded Solomon his son, saying, I am going the way of all the earth, so you shall be strong and be a man, and you shall keep the responsibility given by Yahweh your God, to walk in his ways, to keep his statutes, his commandments, his judgments, and his testimonies, according to what is written in the law of Moses, that you may be prosperous in all that you do and wherever you turn, so that Yahweh may establish his promise which he spoke concerning me, saying, if your sons keep their way, to walk before me in truth with all their heart and with all their soul. He said, you shall not have a man cut off from the throne of Israel.
Perfect. Thank you so much. I'm going to be entirely honest. We could probably spend the next 2 hours covering just these 4 verses alone, because there is so much rich theology in David's words here. But literally so much. And it frustrates me that we're not going to be able to spend as much time as I'd like. What do we see David saying here?
In the first verse, he's basically saying, my time to depart from this world is coming. I'm about ready to die. So
Yeah.
he gives him like instruction.
Yeah, what I really like, for those of y'all who know, I've been teaching, I'm going through 2 Timothy with First Baptist Seabrook on Wednesday nights. And 2 Timothy is Paul's final words, right? It's his final letter. And since we've been going through 2 Timothy, I've also been reflecting on a lot of the other like famous last words in the Bible. And what I've noticed is that when it comes to faithful people in the Bible, usually their last words, whenever they know they're about to die, usually their last words are primarily focused on equipping future generations to be faithful to God, right? And so whenever Jacob knows he's about to die, he turns and he blesses the 12 tribes of Israel. Whenever Moses realizes he's about to die, he blessed the people of Israel, and in a statement that is very similar to this passage right here, he turns and encourages Joshua. And the words that Moses says to Joshua are very similar to what David says to Solomon right here, to such a degree that I wouldn't be surprised if the author is trying to allude back to that, to where basically he is presenting David as the new Moses and Solomon as the new Joshua. We'll talk about that in a second, right? And so, and then if you keep reading through the story, you encounter several people who are always encouraging future generations. Joshua, before he dies, he encourages the people of Israel to be faithful to God. As for me and my house, we will serve the Lord, he says, right? Samuel, right? Whenever he wasn't about to die, but whenever he was getting kicked out of office by the people, he stood before them and said, guys, y'all have chosen to have a king. And before I leave, let me tell you what the king's going to do. But you need to be faithful, right? And if you keep reading through all these stories, faithful people are always preparing the future generations for faithfulness to God, right? Jesus, after his death and resurrection, right before he ascends, he turns to the disciples and says, go and make disciples, right? So he equips them to go and equip others, right? Paul, whenever he is dying, right, he knows he's about to be killed. He writes a letter to Timothy, and he says, Timothy, I'm not going to be around here, so I need you to be ready to fan the flame of your faith and to be ready to die for your faith. And what you have learned from me, teach to other people so that they may teach others also, right? So whenever you actually look through the scriptures, faithful people always die by equipping the future generations to be faithful to God. And David's doing the same thing right here, right? So then David's time to die drew near. Once we talked a lot about how sad the end of David's life really is in the last chapter. And today I don't really want to focus on the sadness of David's, like the end of David's life. I want to focus on the beauty of his words. So his time to die has drawn near, and he knows this. So he commands Solomon his son, saying, I am going the way of all the earth. He doesn't reflect on his life in like some weird, pristine, amazing way where he is just like this amazing person who is unique amongst all the people. He says, no, I am, yes, maybe I had this amazing life, but the time has come for me to go in the way of everybody, right? From dust we came, to dust we go, right? This is the worldview of the Old Testament. It's more or less the worldview of the New Testament as well, but the New Testament's more focused on the resurrection, so it doesn't usually, it doesn't have as much of a dismal worldview, I guess I would suggest, right? To where whenever people die, it's not as much, I'm going the ways of the earth, it's like, I'm returning home to the Lord. But David turns to Solomon and says, I'm going the way of all the earth, right? This is a day that all of us have to face one day. My day is drawing near. And so, like a faithful person, he turns to Solomon and he gives him words of advice. And he says, so you shall be strong and be a man. Okay, what are the first things he tells Solomon to do there? 2 things.
Be strong.
Be strong.
Be a man.
Be a man. All right. So what do you think Solomon needs to do?
Be courageous, be strong.
Be strong and be a man. Right? Apparently, being strong and being a man, they go hand in hand in David's eyes. Right? Our culture might say otherwise, but there is a necessity to be strong if you're going to be a man. Right? And this is not necessarily talking about physical strength. And I'm not even going to suggest that it's talking about just like being stoic and like that's how sometimes people think about it. Whenever it's like, oh, I got to be strong, like I can't express emotion. Do you think David thought that you're not allowed to express emotion as a man? Have you ever read David's Psalms? This is probably the most emotional guy in the world.
Yeah.
David was a super emotional person, but he was also a battle-hardened warrior. But I don't think either of those things is what he means when he says be strong. Instead, I would actually suggest that if we keep reading, he'll explain what he means by both be strong and be a man. He'll explain what it means to be strong and what it means to be a man in the following verse. And you shall keep the responsibility given by Yahweh your God to walk in his ways, to keep his statutes, his commandments, his judgments, his testimonies, according to what is written in the law of Moses, that you may be prosperous in all that you do and wherever you turn. So according to David, what does it mean to be strong? What does it mean to be a man?
Live for God, love God, all your heart.
Yeah. It means to live for God, right? In David's eyes, that's what it means to be strong, right? It's not about being physically strong. Like, he's not saying that you need to be able to bench press 300 pounds or something like that. No. I mean, that's cool if you can do it. I'm sure David probably could. Heck, even at 70 years old, I bet David could do that, right? David's probably a strong dude. But that's not what he's talking about. And he's not talking about being this stoic individual who never expresses emotion. Well, no. He probably wants it like that. That's really a sign of strength as well, right? Rather, he's saying the way you are going to be strong is by finding strength in the strength that actually matters. In the end, no matter how much effort you put in to physical strength, you are not in control of how healthy your body is, right? Because, man, you could go to the gym every single day and you get in a car accident and then you're stuck in a wheelchair the rest of your life, right? You cannot control that, right? So that is a valuable piece of strength, but it's not the most essential, right? And you can act like it's strong to be stoic and not express emotion, but ultimately that's just going to be a lot of pressure that ultimately just caves in on you to where you just feel like you're breaking apart. The strength that David values and the strength that David defines as being a man is a strength that is found in strength in spirit, right? It is a strength that comes from being devoted to God. And so he says in his parting words, Solomon, I'm about to die, aka I'm not going to be around to guide you anymore. So my final words of advice to you are this: be strong and be a man. And what I mean by that is that you need to keep the responsibility given to you by Yahweh your God. Why would he say it's a responsibility given to him?
He's king.
He's king, right? And not only is he a king, he's an Israelite, right? So this responsibility was given to all the people of Israel, but especially to the king. If you go back to Deuteronomy chapter 17, Moses told them, hey, when you get into the land, you're going to be hard-hearted, you're going to ask for a king. God ultimately doesn't want you to do that, but when you inevitably do it, you better make sure that king keeps the law, right? Because if all the people in Israel have turned away from God, at the very least, the king has to be faithful. And so David's saying, Solomon, this hinges on you, right? If you aren't faithful to God, the kingdom is going to collapse. Unfortunately, spoiler alert, that's what's going to happen, right? The kingdom will collapse the year Solomon dies. But this is what David is advising him, right? He says, this responsibility was given to you by God. It could have been given to Adonijah. It could have been given to Absalom. It could have been given to Amnon, but it was given to you. So you need to keep that responsibility given by Yahweh your God, and he wants you to walk in his ways, to keep his statutes, his commandments, his judgments, his testimonies. Right? He literally uses 5 different synonyms to explain this. Right? He's saying do everything you can to obey God. This is the most essential thing you can do. He could take time to break down political policies and say, here's how you make yourself favorable in the eyes of the people. That's not what he does. In his parting words, he says, Solomon, my final advice, be faithful to God. Every commandment he gives, obey it. Every way in which he walks, walk in it. Every statute that he's decreed, obey that as well. Right? That is his advice to Solomon. The rest of it, God will take care of. And that's what he says. Do according to what is written in the law of Moses, that you may be prosperous in all that you do and wherever you turn. Okay, so what is he saying there? That you may be prosperous in all that you do. Why is he encouraging Solomon to be obedient?
Because if you follow God's commands and what he does, then he'll be there to fight for them and to give them what they need in whatever time that they're in.
And why can David say that so confidently?
Because that's what God promised them in their covenant from the very beginning.
Yeah, and ultimately that's what I'm trying to get at. I'm trying to get at the fact that everything David is saying here is built on the covenant. Right? There's 2 covenants he's going to reference here. One is the Mosaic covenant. One is the Davidic covenant. This part is the Mosaic one. This is the covenant that God made to all the people of Israel at Mount Sinai. Right? He gave them this law. And he said, if you obey this law, things will go well with you. If you disobey this law, things are going to go poorly for you. Right? That was his promise. Right? It's a conditional covenant. Right? The covenant he made to Abraham, the covenant he made to David, those are unconditional. Right? Regardless of what those people do, God's going to be faithful. But in regards to the law, God made it very clear. If you obey me, things are going to go well. If you disobey me, things are going to go badly. If you're faithful to my law, you're going to win every battle. If you're not obeying my law, you're going to lose every battle. And so, David says to Solomon, if you want to be a successful king, if you want to prosper as a king and actually fulfill the purpose God gave to you, it's essential that the thing that you focus on is God's law. It doesn't matter how big your army is. It doesn't matter how big your storehouses are. It doesn't matter how much money you have. The main thing you need to do is make sure you're following his law. Because if you give God your everything, he will take care of the rest. And this is why I'm saying it's very similar to what Moses said to Joshua. Right? And not only did Moses say it to Joshua, God himself said it to Joshua at the beginning of Joshua chapter 1. Can somebody flip to that for me real quick? The words are very, very similar. Joshua chapter 1, verses 8 and 9. We love quoting these, usually because we love quoting them out of context. But real quick, Joshua chapter 1, verse 8 and 9. Read it for me, loud and proud.
This book of the law shall not depart from your mouth, but you shall meditate on it day and night, so that you may be careful to do according to all that is written in it. For then you will make your way prosperous, and then you will have success. Have I not commanded you? Be strong and courageous. Do not tremble or be dismayed, for the Lord your God is with you wherever you go.
There you go. Perfect. Right? It's almost the same thing that David said to Solomon right here, right? He's saying, meditate on the book of the law day and night. If you do that, you will prosper in all that you do. Whenever it says prosper there, it is not talking about having endless amounts of money. It's talking about prospering in the task that God gave them. Joshua's task was conquering the land. If you read the book of Joshua, he successfully conquers the land because that was what God charged him to do. And it's because he put the book of the law first. And therefore he says, be strong and courageous. That's what David's saying. Be strong and courageous, right? Meditate on the law. It's just like Moses was the one who led the people out of bondage and led them to the edge of the promised land, and then Joshua was the one who led them into the promised land to conquer. That's kind of what David's doing here, right? He's the one who delivered the people from Saul and delivered them from the Philistines. right? It was an Exodus-like event. He saved the people, and he delivered them. And now he's brought them to the edge of the so-called promised land, right? Where now they have a place where God's temple will come to dwell, right? They have established themselves. And now Solomon is going to be the metaphorical new Joshua, whose job it is to purge the evil from the land, to make sure that this kingdom will flourish, right? So it's very similar what David is doing to Solomon as Moses did to Joshua. So he says, according to what is written in the law of Moses, that you may be prosperous in all that you do and wherever you turn, right? So no matter what you do, you will succeed as long as you keep your eyes on God. But then there's another covenant that David's going to reference here. So that Yahweh may establish his promise which he spoke concerning me. Okay, what covenant is he talking about now?
Davidic.
The Davidic covenant, right? Where can you find this one?
2 Samuel chapter 7.
2 Samuel chapter 7, right? 2 Samuel chapter 7, we covered this like a few months ago. So that Yahweh may establish his promise, which he spoke concerning me, saying, if your sons keep their way, to walk before me in truth, with all their heart, and with all their soul. He said, you shall not have a man cut off from the throne of Israel. So what is David's perspective on this whole thing? What did God promise him?
That the King of Kings will come from his line.
Ultimately, that's where the Davidic covenant points to, but what is he really saying?
Like an eternal dynasty?
An eternal dynasty, right? Remember King Saul? He had a one-man dynasty, right? He was a king, and after a few messes ups, like basically Samuel shows up to him and says, hey, if you hadn't blundered, God would have established your throne. But because you messed up, God's taken the kingdom away from you and given it to another. So Saul, there was only one person from his family who sat on the throne. There were other people who tried, but they were destroyed. David, though, God made a promise to him. And God said, hey, if y'all are faithful, I will put a king on your throne forever. But ironically, if you actually go look at the passage, God didn't really make it hinge on their faithfulness, right? Their faithfulness will determine how they succeed as a kingdom, but ultimately God promised unconditionally that David's dynasty was going to last forever because it didn't hinge on what his children did. It actually hinged on what David did. Because David, he loved the Lord, and he wanted to build a house for God, and therefore God responded and said, I'm going to build a house for you, and it's going to be an eternal one. But as David's encouraging Solomon, he's not focusing on the unconditional aspect of it because he's charging his son to be faithful. And so he says, hey, it is your responsibility now. You are now the head of this covenant. And part of the whole Davidic covenant aspect of things is that since there is a king now enthroned, God is not looking to the people of Israel at large as much as he is looking to the king. Right? And so this king really is the figurehead of all the people. Right? To where before there was a king, God looked at all the people, and if all the people were being faithful, then things were going well. And if all the people were being unfaithful, then things were going badly. Now that they have a king in charge, well, the people already decided that they were going to be unfaithful because they asked for a king. So now God's specifically focused on the king. And so whenever you go forward throughout Israel's history, God isn't going to make his decisions purely based off of what the people are doing. He's going to look at the king in particular. And if the king is being faithful, things are going to go well. And if the king is not being faithful, things are going to go poorly. And usually that's because a faithful king produces a faithful people, and an unfaithful king produces an unfaithful people. But what David's pointing out here is that God has his eyes on you, right? Which is both a good thing and a scary thing, right? There's actually this meme, I think I shared it on my Instagram a few days ago. It's like a meme from Friends with like Joey, the character. And it's like he's smiling, he's like, God knows my heart. And then like his eyes get really big and he's like, God knows my heart. It's like there's both this comforting and terrifying aspect to it, to where it's like, God has his eyes on me, yay! Oh no, God has his eyes on me, right? Depending on whether you're being faithful or unfaithful, that can be both a really comforting or a terrifying thought. Yeah. That's what David is saying to Solomon. He's saying, Solomon, I'm about to die. And that means that God's eyes are turning from me to you. And how you live before him is going to determine how your kingdom prospers. So be strong and be a man. And I'm not talking about your bench press, and I'm not talking about your emotional maturity. I'm talking about your faithfulness. A true man of God, and this is something we can apply, right? There's mainly men in this room. The way that you be a true man is by being godly, right? That's what matters, right? It doesn't matter how much you can bench press. It doesn't matter how in touch you are with your emotions. What matters is how much you place God at the forefront of your life. That's ultimately what matters, right? And that's coming from a man after God's own heart. That's how he defines strength, and that's how he defines manhood. Let's move on.
Now you also know what Joab the son of Zeruiah did to me, what he did to the 2 commanders of the armies of Israel, to Abner the son of Ner, and to Amasa the son of Jether, whom he killed. He also shed the blood of war and peace, and he put the blood of war on his belt about his waist, and on his sandals on his feet. So act according to your wisdom, and do not let his gray hair go down to Sheol in peace. But show loving kindness to the sons of Barzillai the Gileadite, and let them be among those who eat at your table. For they assisted me when I fled from Absalom your brother. Behold, there is with you Shimei the son of Gera the Benjamite, a Bahurim. Now it was he who cursed me with a violent curse on the day I went to Mahanaim. But when he came down to me at the Jordan, I swore to him by Yahweh, saying, I will not put you to death with the sword. So now, do not let him go unpunished, for you are a wise man, and you will know what you ought to do to him, and you will bring his gray hair down to Sheol with blood.
All right. So this is the passage where everybody looks at David, and they're saying, well, the man after God's own heart ain't looking so godly no more, is he? I respectfully disagree. Right? And I'm saying that I'm, like, currently, as I'm saying this, I am disagreeing with some people that I really respect. Right? Some godly mentors I've had in my life who, like, we've talked about this passage, and they're just like, you know what, David, kind of a rough dude. I kind of am on David's side here, and we're going to try to explain why. And you might disagree with me. That's okay. But right off the bat, what do y'all think of this? Just first thoughts.
Going back to what you said earlier about violence. Violence is right there.
Yeah. Getting a lot of violence, for sure.
It's like both sides of his hesed. I think we talked about it before,
Yeah.
like the negative and positive aspects.
Mm-hmm.
Because on one hand, it's the, like he's showing loving kindness, or I'm assuming it's hesed in there, but to like the people who like have helped him out, but also the people who were cursing him. There's like a judgment upon him.
Yeah. So this is the double-sidedness of Hesed, right? Hesed can be a beautiful thing, or it can be a terrifying thing, depending on who you are. But basically, right here, how a lot of people will present this, it's like they'll usually present it like David has a laundry list of people that he just held grudges against that he never truly forgave. And therefore, as he's dying, he's telling Solomon, hey, these guys, I told them they were good in my eyes, but I want you to take care of them. All right? So it's like David is like going through the motions of forgiving when he's not really forgiving. I think that whenever people present it that way, they're failing to understand the actual role that David is playing and the role that Solomon is playing in this grand scheme of God's story. Right? Because I would agree, like if I was on my deathbed currently and I looked over at Sean and I said, hey, you know what? Ben said something to me a long time ago that I'm still upset about, and I think that you should go get on to him about it after I die. I think that would be a little bit different. But the people that David is talking about right here, these are people who could be a legitimate threat to Solomon's reign if they are not taken care of. Right? These are people where in Hebrew you could easily call them Satan, right? The word adversaries, right? These are people who, especially at the end of David's reign, they proved that they were thorns in the flesh to this whole kingdom thing, right? And so as David is preparing to die, he's saying, Solomon, I'm not going to tell you what to do. I'm just telling you, keep your eyes on these people and use judgment in how you handle it. And I'm going to heavily suggest that you handle it with blood. Which sounds a little harsh, but you have to realize this is the situation they're in, right? If they did, like, you couldn't just slap the person on the hand and, like, just, like, sing Kumbaya together. No, this is, like, once again, it's just, this is the difficult part whenever you have, religion and the state, like, religion and government mixing together, right? There's always going to be this weird complexity because this is not really how it was designed to be. You have to remember that David and Solomon are functioning in a role that was never actually meant to exist. Right? Because technically God was supposed to be the king. Right? There was never supposed to be men vying for power. Right? Jesus talks about this whenever he's on earth, right? He's like, guys, we don't lord power over here in this kingdom. Right? It's not about who's in charge. Right? The greatest of you should be the servant. Right? That was what the kingdom of God was supposed to be. It was not supposed to be, ooh, we need somebody who wants to be king. You were not supposed to have Absaloms and Adonijahs and Joabs who were coming in to try to steal the throne. That's because there was never supposed to be a throne to steal to begin with. right? And so by the very nature of this kingdom, they're in a situation that wasn't ideal, right? And they're stuck in that situation, and God is making the most of a negative situation. And so I think David recognizes that complexity, and the things that he's advising Solomon to do here is probably what he needs to do, right? I think he would be failing Solomon if he didn't at least warn him, right? And so usually people look at David here and they're like, oh man, that David guy, like, he was a great guy, but the way he died, man, his final words, not good. I'm just saying, look at it from a different perspective. Recognize what they're going through here. So he continues, right? Literally, he was just telling him about how necessary it is to be godly. And he follows it up and says, now you also know that Joab, the son of Zeruiah, what he did to me, right? And he's going to specifically talk about some things that he did, right? So there's all these things that Joab did, but in particular, what he did to the two commanders of the armies of Israel, to Abner the son of Ner, and to Amasa the son of Jether. Do you remember both of those guys? Who was Abner son of Ner?
Wasn't Abner like his half-brother? David's half-brother?
No.
Saul's commander.
Abner was Saul's commander
Oh.
who defected to David's side. This, remember, 2 Samuel chapter 3? And he was actually going to help David out, but then do you remember what Joab did? Hey Abner, let me talk to you in this dark alleyway real quick. Stab, 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 dead. Right? Joab killed Abner. Okay, do you remember who Amasa was? This is 2 Samuel chapter 20. He was also another commander who defected to David's side. I believe he was actually, if I remember correctly, he was the commander for Absalom, right? And then after the whole Absalom's conspiracy thing, remember David welcomed him in and promoted him, and he put him in place of Joab. Remember? And Joab's like, hey, Amasa, let me talk to you. Stab, 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 dead. Right? So on 2 occasions, Joab rejected David's authority and killed somebody who he thought was replacing him. Right? So Joab, he did some bad stuff. He killed Abner son of Ner and Amasa son of Jether, both of whom he killed. He also shed the blood of war in peace. What does he mean by that?
Wasn't he trying to be peaceful by declaring war?
Well, it's saying that he killed people as if there was a war going on when really there was peace. Right? It's one thing to kill people in the middle of a war. Right? Because that's what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to kill people when a war's going on. You kill the enemy. Joab, though, he would kill people during peacetime as if it was war. And Abner and Amasa are good examples of it. Right? These are people who were supposed to be friends, and he killed them. Right? And so David's just pointing out, remember what Joab did to me as king. Right? Don't think that he'll do anything less to you, because remember, he tried to put your brother in charge over you. Right? He was not on your side. So if you think he's going to show you more respect than he showed me, his uncle, probably not. He put the blood of war on his belt, about his waist, and on his sandals on his feet. Right? This guy is stained in blood. Right? Once again, what is our whole quote when it comes to Joab?
You don't mess with Joab.
You don't mess with Joab. That's what David is saying to Solomon. He's saying, hey, my nephew, your cousin, he's a gory guy. Right? This dude, he does not have a peaceful bone in his body. He loves blood, and he loves killing, and he loves power. Be aware of that. So act according to your wisdom, but do not let his gray hair go down to Sheol in peace. So what's he saying?
And end his life, kill him.
He's like, I'm not going to tell you what to do. I'm just saying that if what you're doing does not result in his death, you're doing it wrong. Right? So this is him heavily hinting Joab needs to die. Right? David himself didn't do that because, and this is where there is some complexity there, right? Like, why didn't David kill Joab? I don't know. Right? Maybe it's because Joab was useful, because Joab was pretty loyal to David really up until the end. Right? It was only up at the very end that he really begins showing his true colors. And by then, David's feeble, and he's just laying in his bed, and he really isn't doing much. Right? So maybe that's why. Maybe it was because it was his nephew, and he felt like, I don't feel like stirring up more trouble in my family. I've already got everybody against me. I don't want to make my sister mad for killing her son. Maybe that's why. I don't know. David didn't do it. But in his dying breath, he says, Solomon, if you want to be a good king, and if you want to lead the kingdom towards God, Joab's got to be one of the first people you get out of here because he's a problem. Furthermore, show loving kindness, show hesed, to the sons of Barzillai the Gileadite, and let them be among those who eat at your table. For they assisted me when I fled from Absalom your brother. So what does he say there?
Show grace, show the loving kindness of God as said to Barzillai.
Yeah, do you remember Barzillai?
I remember his name, but I can't remember.
Do you remember that extended story when David was descending out of the Mount of Olives and going up, really fleeing into the wilderness? There was this one guy who came out and he helped David, right? And he was like, hey, here's all this food and stuff like that. David didn't forget that. And David says, Solomon, I don't want you, like his final words of advice, he's saying you need to get rid of evil and you need to bless those who have blessed you. I would actually argue that this is David's reference to a third covenant that God has made. He's referenced the Mosaic covenant. He's referenced the Davidic covenant. This seems to be David fulfilling the Abrahamic covenant, right? Because what did God say to Abraham, right? I will make you a great nation. I will make you great. You will be a blessing to the world. I will bless those who bless you, and those who do not, I'm going to curse, and in you all the families of the world will be blessed, right? God's promise to Abraham was that Abraham would be a blessing to the world, and that God would bless those people who blessed him. Okay, well, David is the seed of Abraham, right? He is the leading, he's the king, right? And so, since Barzillai blessed him, David's saying, in fulfillment of what God has promised, you need to bless Barzillai, right? Just as Barzillai gave us food, so you should feed Barzillai's family, right? Because the whole reason we're here is because Barzillai took care of us. Therefore, we should take care of him, because that's what God has told us to do. This is the hesed of God, right? Barzillai has no reason to expect this kindness, but you're going to get it anyways, because that's how you establish yourself as a good king. Behold, there is with you Shimei, the son of Jerah the Benjamite, of Bacharim. Now it was he who cursed me with a violent curse on the day I went to Mahanaim. Do you remember this guy?
I do.
Do you remember Shimei? What did he do?
He threw rocks at David and cursed him.
Yes. So whenever David's fleeing from Absalom, once again, same moment, right? Shimei comes out, and Shimei is descended from who? What family is he from?
Benjamin.
Well, he's from the tribe of Benjamin, but he's from the family of Saul. Remember? And so he was cursing David, and he's throwing stones at the king. Right? That is a capital offense. That could get you killed. But David showed him grace. Right? But he didn't forget. He said, I'm not going to, he said, because remember David's mindset? He said, you know what? Maybe I needed to hear these words. Right? That's fine. I'm just going to leave. Right? And so he just trusted that maybe God gave him a reason to do this, and so he just dealt with it. But what he did was he was striking the Lord's anointed. He was stoning the Lord's anointed. This is like trying to kill somebody. Right? He should be tried for murder. But David let it go. But he tells him, hey, there was this guy from the house of Saul, and he cursed me on the day that I went out to Mahanaim. This probably isn't that long ago, right? Absalom's rebellion was probably near the end of David's life. But when he came down to me at the Jordan, I swore to him by Yahweh, saying, I will not put you to death with the sword. So now, do not let him go unpunished, for you are a wise man. And you will know what you ought to do with him, and you will bring his gray hair down to Sheol with blood. This is the part where people really start being like, okay, David, now you're stepping back on your words. You told this guy that you weren't going to kill him, and now you're just telling your son to kill him. What do y'all think?
I think David's doing the right thing and telling Solomon to not let. Is it Shimei?
Shimei?
To kill him because he cursed God's anointed, and you never do that.
Okay. But does that mean David was being a liar? And once again, you can disagree with me. That's fine. I'm just asking. I'm not saying this is an easy situation to navigate through, because I'm going to be honest. Just looking at it, it seems kind of messed up to me. I'm like, what the heck, David? No, this is kind of like in the if you've seen the movie Batman Begins. Whenever Batman has this a whole rule, he's like he doesn't kill people, and at the very end of the movie, Batman's like, I'm not going to kill you, but I don't have to save you either, and he's like lets the guy die, and I'm like, that's kind of like killing somebody. Like it's not. Like, you're not the one who pulled the trigger, but you, like, didn't stop somebody else from pulling the trigger, you know? That's kind of what it looks like. But what do y'all think? Is David justified, or is he just really just messing up right here? Why would he, or maybe another question to help see it from my perspective, why would David need to tell this to Solomon? Why do you think that this is worth bringing up again?
Just so that Solomon didn't go through what David went through, like in terms of how it went about, like how Joab was when David was king. So that can be like de-escalated, like way down where it won't be an issue.
Yeah, well, I think that really is part of it. I think what he's doing is he is preventing Solomon from having to go through the same things he did. Specifically, remember, David's entire life was not only focused on establishing the kingdom of God, but it was also having to deal with the complications of Saul's stubborn family, right? The way that 2 Samuel ended was with David having to right some of the wrongs that Saul's family had done, right? In David's entire reign, he was having to deal with Saul's family and their continued opposition to him. And so I think right here he's saying, Solomon, that guy cursed me, and he deserved to die, but I showed him mercy. And notice he doesn't explicitly tell him to kill him. He says, do with him according to your wisdom, but I have a strong feeling that you're going to be the one bringing his head down in blood. Basically, I think what he's implying is, I don't think that's the last you've heard of Shimei. And let me just tell you right now, if he messes up again, he's already taken the last straw. Right? So don't like, the time for grace is over. Right? If this guy messes up again, don't let him try to tell you, oh, be gracious with me. No, he's received grace. The time of grace is over. Right? Because this is going to be, this is a continual thorn in the flesh. I dealt with it my entire reign. You need to be the one to wipe it out. If he's not a problem, do that according to your wisdom. But if he does something else to mess things up, well, then you need to step up and you need to, there's got to be some sort of punishment for this, right? I didn't want to do it because I didn't want to be the type of, if you think of it from David's perspective, if he had done something to Shimei, he would have been justified in doing it, but it wouldn't have fixed the problem, right? It would have just encouraged further animosity. Instead, for Solomon to do this, politically speaking, it makes sense. Because Shimei has had the opportunity to redeem himself. But if he acts up again, well, now Solomon's justified. Because everybody knows that David was gracious. And therefore, Solomon is justified in what he does. Right? And so this is a way to tactfully go about this in a way without just ruining everything again. So I get where David's coming from. And people might disagree. And you know what? Maybe I'm wrong. I think there's a lot of moral complexity here that the author of the Kings doesn't totally outline for us. It doesn't just explain. It doesn't say and David was correct in doing this. But at the same time, we have to remember that this whole chapter began with David saying, be strong, be a man, follow in the ways of God. It seems like it'd be really weird for him to immediately follow that up with commands that were telling him to just work against what God would want, especially if the author didn't stop to highlight that. But instead, in the things that we're going to see in the rest of this chapter, it seems like the author is giving his seal of approval to what Solomon's doing. And so to me, I would suggest that what David's suggesting here is good. It might look kind of squirrely, but I think that's because, like always, David is just really in tune with the heart of God. Right? I mean, think about it. Remember when David was in the cave of, whatever, he was in the cave of En-Gedi, and Solomon's right there? And he had the opportunity to kill him. And from everybody else's perspective, the morally good thing to do right there would probably be to kill him. Right? Because you'd be saving all these other people from being oppressed. You'd be delivering the nation from this terrible tyrant. But David says, no. I'm going to choose to allow my people to suffer, and I'm going to choose to allow the kingdom of God to suffer because I don't want to touch the Lord's anointed. David, he's built different, right? He thinks different, right? His men will go into the city of Bethlehem to retrieve water for him. And he'll be so torn up over this that he'll pour the water on the ground. And everybody was probably thinking, well, that was kind of a spit in the face. And he says, no. I meant this as a compliment. And so you have to realize that David thinks differently than a lot of times we all do. And David's called a man after God's own heart. He's not simply called a man who did everything right. He was a man who was really in tune with how God thought. And so that's why I kind of err on the side of David here. Mainly because usually the Bible will make it clear when David messes up. Right? It'll tell us, right? Like with David and Bathsheba, it's very clear he messed up. He's called out for it. Right here, it seems to be suggesting that what he's suggesting is Correct. Sound good? All right. We move on. If I can get the... There you go. Let's just read verses 10 to 12 first.
Then David slept with his fathers and was buried in the city of David. And the time that which David reigned over Israel was 40 years. In Hebron he reigned 7 years, and in Jerusalem he reigned 33 years. And Solomon sat on the throne of David his father, and his kingdom was firmly established.
Well, there goes David. It's kind of sad. It feels like the end of an era. I don't know. Just like, we've been with him for so long. It's like...
Well, it's kind of like a big transition, because you have, with him, like, there's a lot of other people that are also kind of passing.
Yeah.
Like, with the chapter.
Yeah, well, yeah, he's just the first death that we're about to experience. But yeah, there's David's death. We don't hear anything more than that. We just have him giving Solomon advice. And then David slept with his fathers and was buried in the city of David. He passed away. Benjamin and I, we've been to the city of David, haven't we? It's actually really cool. You can go over to Israel. So whenever you think of the city of Jerusalem, you have to realize that Jerusalem, it's a very small city. And the old city of Jerusalem is even smaller, but the city of David, Jerusalem at the time of David, was even smaller than that. It was this tiny little sliver. You can still look at it when you look at a map. Tiny little sliver, and nowadays it's an archaeological site to where they've actually discovered what they believe to be the Palace of David. You can actually look at it, and it's really cool. To where like you can just see like the ruins and stuff like that. And so this is where David, he reigned at. This is where he was buried at. And that's the end of the story of David, right? But it's just the beginning of the story of Kings, right? And so it's like a bittersweet ending. Like David has died, but the story's not over yet, which is really cool, right? There is that like hope of, oh wow, like David is an amazing figure, but apparently he was just a foretaste of some greater figure to come, right? And so even with David's death, you're supposed to be kind of excited to see like, where's the story going to head next? Especially after all these words that like David said to Solomon, right? So David slept with his fathers. I also like how the Bible puts that. Sometimes like you go read through Genesis, and it says, so-and-so had many sons and daughters, and then he died. And then he died. And then he died. Like Genesis chapter 5, just repetition. Died. And the reason why it uses that language is because it's trying to kind of make you depressed. Because you see that death is abundant, right? Basically, all these people's lives are reduced. Like they lived hundreds of years, yet all their lives are reduced to is they had kids and they died. It's depressing. You're like, wow, is that all there is to life? From dust you came to dust you go. Life, death, life, death, life, death. They had more kids than they died. They had more kids than they died. That's depressing. But a lot of the times what the Bible will do whenever it's trying to be like more respectful and reflective on people's death is it won't say they died. It says they slept. Right? And this is the language that Jesus likes to use in the New Testament. Right? Remember whenever Lazarus dies? They're like, how's Lazarus doing? Oh, he's sleeping. Oh, well, let's go wake him up. And Jesus is like, well, no, he's dead. Like, sorry. Like, didn't realize y'all weren't picking that up.
And Paul, too. Like, the Corinthian church is like, that's why some of you have fallen asleep.
Oh, yes. Yeah, some of you have fallen asleep. Like, this is the language. And it's really beautiful because, obviously, as Christians, really that's all we view death is, right? It's not like this permanent thing. Like, yes, it's sober-minded and you should reflect on it. But if you believe in God, it's like you're just sleeping, right? You fall asleep and you wake up in somewhere much more amazing than where you once dwelt, right? And so he slept, right? And he slept and he was with his fathers. Back in that day, like you would literally be buried with your kin. But most likely, in this case, like usually it'll say they were gathered to the fathers. But David's family probably wasn't buried in Jerusalem, were they? They were probably buried back in Bethlehem because that's where he came from, right? And so he wasn't gathered to his fathers, but he slept with his fathers, right? So he died like his forefathers did before him. And now he's buried in the city of David, right? He's buried in Jerusalem, the city that he conquered, the city that he established as the capital, the city where the Ark of God came to dwell. That's really cool. And the time which David reigned over Israel was 40 years. In Hebron, he reigned 7 years, and in Jerusalem, he reigned 33 years. So you remember that at the beginning of 2 Samuel, he was king over Hebron for a little bit. We don't really learn a lot about those 7 years, but then everything else was during those 33 years. And Solomon sat on the throne of David his father, and his kingdom was firmly established. And you're probably wondering, well, how was this kingdom established? I'm glad you asked, because that's what the rest of this chapter is about. right? It's going to establish this, and really the next few chapters are about how Solomon's kingdom is established. So let's read on.
Then Adonijah the son of Haggith came to Bathsheba the mother of Solomon, and she said, "Do you come peacefully?" And he said, "Peacefully." Then he said, "I have something to say to you." And she said, "Speak." So he said, "You know that the kingdom was mine, and that all Israel expected me to be king. However, the heathen has turned about and become my brothers, for it was his from Yahweh. So now I am making one request of you. Do not turn me away." And she said to him, "Speak." Then he said, "Please speak to Solomon the king, for he will not turn you away, that he may give me Abishag the Shunammite as a wife." And Bathsheba said, "Very well, I will speak to the king for you."
All right. Perfect. What are you laughing at?
Good.
Okay.
I was thinking the same thing. I was laughing too, like
What were you laughing for?
thinking about what we just read.
What's funny about it?
It's like Adonijah is being like I should have been king, but okay, Solomon's king, but he can just do me one small favor to make up for that.
Yeah.
Give me a wife.
Yes. So Adonijah, he's kind of plotting a little bit here.
Yes.
Right, Adonijah has something in mind. Hey, could you grab me a water?
Yeah.
Also, okay. Adonijah's got a plot here because he's not totally satisfied with not being king, and so he's going to kind of plan something here. Adonijah, once again, this is the son of David who was clinging to the altar last chapter, and remember Solomon was gracious to him. Right? Remember Solomon said, "Go home." Like, Adonijah, go home. I'm not going to punish you today. Behave. And Adonijah probably should have just stayed home. But instead, he's not happy. So Adonijah, son of Haggith, came to Bathsheba, the mother of Solomon. So he comes to his, I guess, what, stepmother? And she said, "Do you come peacefully?" And he said, "Peacefully." Do you know what's ironic about that phrase?
You said that, but I don't think good.
Solomon's name means peace.
Yeah, Solomon's name means peace, right? This is the word shalom, right? Do you come in shalom? I come in shalom. Hello, mother of Shalom, the king. I have a request. Do you come in shalom? Yes, I come in shalom. Anyways, now that your king Shalom is king, I got a request for you, right? The irony would be, if you're reading this in Hebrew, it's kind of like, are you coming asking for something that favors King Solomon or against King Solomon? And if he truly came in peace, well, then he would say, "I come in peace," right? I come shalom, right? Because the peaceful way to go about things is by supporting King Solomon. And that's what he's claiming to do, right? He says, "Yes, I come in peace." No, he doesn't. He might say he's coming in shalom and he's supporting King Shalom, but no, he's not. He actually has ulterior motives, right? And Solomon's going to pick up on this. So, do you come peacefully? Yes, I come peacefully. Then he said, "I have something to say to you." And she said, "Speak." She's like, "All right, I'm listening." You get the idea that Bathsheba's just indicating this. All right, let's see where this goes. So he said, "You know that the kingdom was mine, and that all Israel expected me to be king. However, the kingdom has turned about and become my brother's, for it was his from Yahweh." You can sense like there's a little bitterness underneath this, right? He's trying to act very spiritual, right? He's kind of being like King Saul a little bit. Well, we know that God wanted, God, grace be to him, amazing God. He wanted the kingdom to be Solomon's, and so it ended up right where it needed to be. But I do want to remind you, everybody supported me. So it's like, okay. And funny enough, like, when you look at the last chapter, did it seem like everybody supported Adonijah?
No.
Not really. I mean, maybe he got some supporters, but like, it was kind of a depressing little turnout, right? I mean, he got a bunch of people to come out there, but he was having to set everything up for himself, right? This guy, the idea is that he hasn't truly been humbled, right? He still thinks that he deserves the kingdom, and he's just giving lip service to the fact that God put it there, right? The idea is that he still thinks he should be king, but David pulled the God card again. And so, well, we know that Yahweh wanted Solomon to be king, and so despite the fact that literally everybody else wanted me to be king, your son's king. Praise be to God. Right? Like, so you can read the subversiveness in his words. So now, I am making one request of you. Do not turn me away. And how does Bathsheba respond?
Speak.
Speak. She literally just says the same thing again. Speak. Speak. Like, the idea is that Bathsheba really doesn't want anything to do with Adonijah, it seems like. Right? He's like, I have something to say to you. Speak. Speak. Like, she's kind of just like, get to the point. Right? Like, just tell me what you want. Then he said, please speak to Solomon the king. Ah, there it is. He comes in peace, and now he wants her to talk to King Peace. I need you to ask a request of King Solomon for me. Because he's not going to turn you away. Because you're his mom, right? And I mean, the whole reason he's on the throne is because you went and talked to daddy for him. Right? He's not going to turn away anything from his mom. I just have a request from you. Give me Abishag the Shunammite as a wife. Who the heck is Abishag the Shunammite?
She was the young woman that they gave to David to like keep him warm.
Yes, she was David's nurse before he died, right? This was the last bedmate David ever had, right? He never was intimate with her, but she shared the bed with him, and she probably was viewed from many perspectives as part of his harem, right? Even if he never actually slept with her, from everybody else's perspective, you know, it probably was viewed that way. So ultimately, what is he asking here? Okay, let's go back. If you're just thinking from Adonijah's perspective, who seems to have been Adonijah's like idol? Like, who was the guy that he admired more than everybody based off of the things he did last chapter? Who did he build his entire conspiracy off of?
You mean Absalom?
Absalom, right? It seems like Adonijah just looked at Absalom and was like, I love everything that guy did. I'm just going to do it again, right? That's kind of what Adonijah did. Okay, well, whenever Absalom successfully rebelled against David, what was the first thing that Absalom did in front of everybody? Do you remember?
Showed his
Whenever he went
dominance.
to the roof.
He went onto the roof and asserted his dominance by sleeping with David's concubines. Well, Abishag isn't directly a concubine, and so you can see how Adonijah might be trying to be squirrely here and be like, well, she's not technically a concubine, I was just really into her. But everybody else would view her that way. And so he's still literally just trying to be a copycat Absalom, right? He's like, all right, that first attempt didn't work, but I can still show everybody who's in charge. And it seems to imply that he thinks that Bathsheba is so stupid that she's not going to pick up on this, right? Hey, Bathsheba! Hey, yeah, I come in peace. Yeah, no, honestly, there's just this girl I'm really into. Remember Abishag? Yeah, I know you didn't like her either because she was cuddling with your man. I know you didn't like her. Nobody liked her. I think she's super attractive. Would you ask Solomon if I could marry her? I mean, she's not cuddling with David anymore. He's dead. Solomon probably doesn't want her. I would love to marry her. Would that be okay with you? It seems like he thinks that Bathsheba is just stupid. How does Bathsheba respond?
Very well. I'll speak with the king for you.
Very well, I'll speak to the king for you. Notice that she doesn't say, I will speak favorably to the king for you.
Nope.
And she doesn't say, oh yeah, no, I can get you that request. I think she's very subtle. I think Bathsheba, she's been in the business long enough. I think that she understands exactly what he's requesting. And she's like, oh, I would be happy to talk to King Solomon. I'm sure he would love to hear about this. Right? Because I think Bathsheba knows where this story's heading. Right? And so, we move on.
So Bathsheba went to King Solomon to speak to him for Adonijah. And the king arose to meet her, bowed before her, and sat on his throne. Then he had a throne set for the king's mother, and she sat on his right. Then she said, I am making one small request of you. Do not turn me away. And the king said to her, Ask my mother, for I will not turn you away. So she said, Let Abishag the Shunammite be given to Adonijah your brother as a wife. Then King Solomon answered and said to his mother, And why are you asking Abishag the Shunammite for Adonijah? Ask for him also the kingdom, for he is my older brother. Even for him, for Abiathar the priest, and for Joab the son of Zeruiah. Then King Solomon swore by Yahweh, saying, May God do so to me and more also, if Adonijah has not spoken this word against his own life. So now, as Yahweh lives, who has established me and set me on the throne of David my father, and who has made me a house as he promised, surely Adonijah shall be put to death today. So King Solomon sent Benaiah the son of Jehoiada, and they fell upon him so that he died.
Boom.
Bam.
Wow, okay. That escalated quickly. That got out of hand real fast. Another person's dead. Breaking news. Yeah, so, how does this encounter go down?
Solomon basically like sees through the situation, and he sees basically like the heart of what Adonijah is like wanting to do.
Yeah, and I would say that the interaction between Bathsheba and Solomon is very interesting, right? Because it really seems like she is genuinely advocating for Adonijah here, but I really don't think she is, right? If anything, I would suggest maybe she's testing Solomon here, or she's just like, just entertaining the idea. Because, I mean, Bathsheba would really have to be dumb, right? I mean, we know she's not dumb because literally chapter 1 established like her showing up being like, hey David, Adonijah's trying to take the throne, right? Like she was the one who initiated all of this stuff. So Bathsheba is not stupid. And so if Adonijah shows up just a little while later and is like, hey, can I have that one girl? Like, Bathsheba knows what's going on here. And so that just leads me to believe that there's more like subtlety going on behind all these interactions.
Maybe like the tone.
Well, no, that's what I'm saying. I think if you could be in the room, I think the tone of the words would probably be different than we might initially expect just reading through it. So let's walk through it. So, just like she said, Bathsheba went to King Solomon to speak to him for Adonijah, right? And keep in mind, I think one reason why she might say the things the way she does is because she knows that Solomon's going to come to the conclusion that he's going to come to, and so she is going to simply present the things exactly as Adonijah presented them, because that shows how devious Adonijah is, right? Whereas if Bathsheba came in there and just said, your brother's trying to steal the throne from you, well, that would put Solomon in a weird place, because now he's just taking it as hearsay, right? Whereas really, it seems like, and so if he went and killed Adonijah then, it'd be like, okay, well, did Adonijah really mess up, or was Bathsheba just trying to get the Adonijah out of the way? Whereas right here, Bathsheba is doing everything Adonijah requested, and ultimately Adonijah is bringing about his own downfall, right? Because he's just dumb, right? I feel really bad for Adonijah, right? He's an Absalom wannabe who should have realized that first off, Absalom died. It didn't work out for Absalom, and you're not nearly as good as Absalom, right? So it's just gonna fail on all accounts, right? And so Bathsheba just kind of goes along with it. Sure, I'd love to go talk to Solomon. Honestly, she's probably been waiting for Adonijah to do this just so she could get rid of Adonijah. So Bathsheba went to King Solomon to speak to him for Adonijah, and the king arose to meet her, bowed before her, and sat on his throne. And he had a throne set for the king's mother, and she sat on his right. What do y'all think about that?
Makes me think of royalty.
Yeah, I just think it's really sweet. I just think that's so cool. Like, this guy is a king, yet he's still not, so stuck up and proud to, get up and, bow before his mother. I just think that's kind of cool. He gets up, and he's literally the king of God's people. He is the most important human on the face of the planet right now. His mom walks in, he gets up and bows down. I just think that's so sweet. He's like, oh, Mom, so good to see you. And then he's like, people, bring a throne in here for my mom. It's like, come on, sit right next to me. Right? This is really cool. Also, he's elevating her to a position of power right here. Right? He's on the throne, and she's got a throne right to the right of him. That's a pretty big deal. Right? That's saying, basically, Mom, I value your words very highly. Right? He's not just, making her, stand there like a peasant coming to ask for a request. No, sit right here next to me. Let's have a discussion. This is, a board meeting of, royal dignitaries. Bathsheba's right here. So the king arose to meet her, bowed before her, and sat on his throne. And when he had had a throne set for the king's mother, and she sat on his right. Then she said, I'm making one small request of you, don't turn me away. Right? So she's presenting it exactly as Adonijah presented it. Just a teeny little request. Not a big request, it's not a big deal at all. I'm not asking you to hand the kingdom over, just a tiny little request. She's not changing anything from how Adonijah presented it. She's just doing exactly what Adonijah asked. Just a tiny little request from Solomon. And the king says, ask my mother, for I will not turn you away. Shows a lot of respect Solomon has for his mom, right? And he probably just believes her. He's like, yeah, Mom, whatever you ask. I mean, I would do anything for you. You're my mom. Absolutely. And then she asks the request. And you'll notice in how he responds that he doesn't say, Mom, sorry, I've got to deny your request. Instead, the way he's going to respond implies that he knows that they're on the same page. He's like, oh, I see what's happening here. Adonijah asked, okay, I got this. So she said, let Abishag the Shunammite be given to Adonijah your brother as a wife. I imagine that as soon as she said this, like if you were in the room, you would just see this like look dawn over Solomon's eyes.
Yeah.
And he's probably like,
You go.
did he literally ask you to come say this to me? And she probably laughed. She's like, I kid you not, he did. like I can imagine that's how the conversation went down, where she's like, this guy. like, to where Solomon's like, are you kidding me? Like, I told him to go home and behave. Really, he had the audacity to ask you, my mom. Oh my gosh, what an idiot. Like, I imagine that's kind of how the conversation went down, right? Son, can I ask a tiny little request? It's really so small. Absolutely, Mom, what do you want? So, your brother wants to know if he can marry Abishag. Does he really? Wow. Good job, Adonijah. Then King Solomon answered and said to his mother, and why are you asking Abishag the Shunammite for Adonijah? Ask for him also the kingdom, for he is my older brother, even for him, for Abiathar the priest, and for Joab the son of Zeruiah. So as soon as Solomon hears this request, how does he respond?
It's like, really?
Oh,
You
like
might as well like give the power to Adonijah if you're gonna give the Abishag the Shunammite to him.
Yeah, he's like, tiny little request my butt.
Yeah.
Like, that ain't a tiny request. Like, shoot, you give him Abishag, might as well give him the whole kingdom. Right? Dad established me as the king. God established me as the king. If the first thing I do as king is give my older brother one of Dad's old, like women, well, that's basically like me handing the kingdom over. He's my older brother. From a human perspective, he has a more claim to the throne. And if he is taking one of Dad's women into his bed, well, from a human perspective, that's an even higher claim to the throne. Don't you remember what Absalom did? No, I ain't doing that. No, that ain't no tiny request. That's a huge request, and I'm not going to do it. Which I think Bathsheba knew, right? Once again, I don't think Bathsheba was stupid here. I think she knew exactly how Solomon would respond, and that's why she doesn't argue back. Why are you asking Abishag the Shunammite? Ask for him also the kingdom. He's my brother. Even for him and Abiathar and for Joab. Right? He says, the whole reason I'm king is because before Dad died, he wanted to make sure that their mission was not successful when they tried to overthrow the kingdom. If I gave them Abishag, I would be undoing everything that Dad did. Right? He would basically be making himself king again, and then you'd have Abiathar who would be in charge again, and Joab would be in charge again, and none of that needs to be happening. Right? All of that stuff is bad stuff. So no, I'm not giving him Abishag the Shunammite. Then King Solomon swore by Yahweh. Oh no. This is a very important promise. It's in the name of God. And he said, may God do so to me, and more also, if Adonijah has not spoken this word against his own life. What is he saying there? Like, what does he mean when he says, may God do to me and more also?
Like, if he hasn't actually asked that and he kills him.
Yeah. Well, really what he's getting at here, so yes, there's that aspect to it, but really what he's ultimately saying is, to translate it, I'll be caught dead if I don't go kill Adonijah right now. Right? The fact that Adonijah had the audacity to say this, like, if I didn't respond by killing Adonijah, then God should strike me dead right now. That's what he's saying. Right? May God do so to me and more also. Right? If I don't go and kill Adonijah, then God should strike me dead, because I'm an unfit king. Because Adonijah, he received mercy once. Right? He was clinging to the altar, and Solomon told him, go home. He should have stayed home. But instead, he has continually pushed back against the Lord's anointed. And right now, he's not just insulting Solomon, is he? He's also insulting David. Right? And that's Solomon's dad. And that's Adonijah's dad. And he says, you're wanting Abishag? The last person who kept Dad warm? You're wanting her to make you warm now? No. Unacceptable. And this is like an insult in the face of like all God's covenant, right? He's like spitting in the face of David, spitting in the face of Solomon, spitting in the face of God, because he had the audacity to say all this in the name of God. Remember, he comes before Bathsheba and says, well, I've come to terms with the fact that God wants Solomon enthroned. I just want Abishag. So he was doing this with a veneer of being godly, right? He's acting like he's doing this in godly terms. Oh, I have no claim for the throne. Solomon's like, no, this dude has the audacity to do this. If I didn't kill him right now, I would be a failure as a king. He's been gracious, but they've pushed it. So now, as Yahweh lives, who has established me and set me on the throne of David my father, and who has made me a house as he has promised, surely Adonijah shall be put to death today. So he emphasizes me here, but he's not emphasizing it for his own glory, is he? Right? He's emphasizing it because of what God has done. Right? As God lives, right? The whole reason I am king right now is not because I fought for the throne. It is because there is a God who lives. And there's a God who made a promise. And that promise is enduring, and therefore, if that God is still alive, then I'm going to be caught dead before I allow somebody to oppose that God. This is a really good thing for Solomon right here. As Yahweh lives, who established me, set me on the throne of David my father, and who has made me a house as he promised, surely Adonijah shall be put to death today. Not because Solomon hates Adonijah, but because Adonijah is acting in rebellion against the kingdom of God. He is acting as an adversary, a Satan. Right? This is righteous judgment coming against the adversaries of the kingdom of God. Right? Adonijah is trying to be a usurper. Right? He is literally being like Satan, trying to overthrow the kingdom of God. And Solomon says, I would be a failure as a king if I did not wipe this out. Right? I was gracious before, but now he has abused that grace. As the king, I've got to wipe this out. So, King Solomon sent Benaiah, the son of Jehoiada, and he fell upon him so that he died. Remember good old Benaiah? This is the dude who fought the lion in the snow. Right? This was the head of David's bodyguard. He becomes Solomon's hitman in this chapter. This is not the last time you're going to hear about Benaiah. Basically, Benaiah is the guy that you send to go get jobs done. Kind of sad, but yeah. So that is how Adonijah meets his end. Right? Adonijah made a simple request because he thought he could be cunning. You know what the heartbreaking aspect of this whole thing would be? If Adonijah legit, like, if he like actually just wanted to marry Abishag and was just so dumb that he didn't realize the implications of what he was asking. That would be really sad.
Yeah.
He was like, no, I actually was fine with it all. But that's not what's happening, right? He did have ulterior motives. Solomon recognizes this, and therefore he sends Benaiah to go kill Adonijah. Really sad.
Then to Abiathar the priest, the king said, Go to Anathoth to your own field, for you deserve to die. But I will not put you to death at this time, because you carry the ark of Lord Yahweh before my father David, and because you were afflicted in everything with which my father was afflicted. So Solomon drove Abiathar away from being priest to Yahweh, in order to fulfill the word of Yahweh, which he had spoken concerning the house of Eli in Shiloh.
Perfect. All right. So now we see basically the way that Solomon's kingdom is going to be established is by kicking out all the bad guys, right? Which in many ways, once again, he's like the new Joshua, right? Moses established the law and he brought the people to God. That's what David did, right? David established the kingdom and he introduced mass revival in Israel. So, then Joshua, he went and he conquered the land, right? He kicked out the Canaanites. He kicked out the bad people. Solomon's doing the same thing, right? Solomon is now looking internally at the kingdom and is kicking out the bad stuff, right? That's what he's doing. And so who's the next person that he turns to?
Abiathar the priest.
Abiathar the priest. Who is Abiathar the priest?
The name sounds very familiar.
That's what I'm saying. Whenever you get to 1 Kings, it's like, this is where you got to start remembering these names. They're going to start all coming up. Fortunately, a lot of the names people are going to die today. But
Was it Ahimelech or was it Abimelech? It was
Ahimelech. Yes. So Abiathar, we talked about it in the last chapter, right? He was the priest who supported Adonijah in his rebellion, right? And remember, Abiathar, he had a long history with David, right? Where whenever David was on the run from King Saul, David went to Ahimelech the priest and asked for bread, and Ahimelech gave him bread. As a result, King Saul killed Ahimelech and all of his family. But Abiathar escaped, And Abiathar ran to David and lived with David while David was on the run. And so Abiathar grew up with David, right? Like David was his leader and David was his guy. And Abiathar was a faithful priest throughout David's reign, but at the very end of it, he supports Adonijah. And he kind of betrays David. And as a result, since Solomon just took care of the Adonijah situation, it seems like his mind is on this stuff again. And so he goes against Abiathar, and he doesn't have him killed, right? Because Solomon says, I'm not going to have you killed because I'm not going to do that to a priest of God. But you're unqualified to be a priest now. Which makes sense, because he opposed the Lord's anointed, right? You don't do that if you're a priest, right? Like, you literally tried to lead a coup against the man of God. You do not belong as a priest anymore. And so that's what he says. Then to Abiathar the priest, the king said, go to Anathoth to your own field, for you deserve to die. He says, I have the right as king to kill you right now. You opposed God's anointed one, and you tried to lead a rebellion against the king. I should not let you live. But because I'm gracious, and because God is gracious, I'm going to let you live, but you deserve to die. But I will not put you to death at this time, because you carried the ark of the Lord Yahweh before my father David. And because you were afflicted in everything with which my father was afflicted. So what are the two reasons why he doesn't want to kill Abiathar?
Carry the ark of God for his father David, for Solomon's dad.
Yeah, so that's one of the reasons. What's the other reason?
He was afflicted.
He was with David in the wilderness.
He was with David, yeah. So he's saying, hey, you deserve to die, but the only reason I'm not killing you is because I really appreciate what you did for my dad. Up until the end. At the end, you rebelled against him. But before that, you were there when they brought the Ark of God into Jerusalem. And you were there serving and ministering before the Ark of God, and you were a faithful priest. And you did so good for a really long time. I'm not going to kill you because I appreciate that. And not only that, but whenever my dad was going through it and your whole family was killed, you still supported my dad. And you chose to be afflicted alongside him. And you chose to suffer along David back then. And so I'm not going to kill you. So just go home, right? Go back to your field. You're no longer a priest. In many ways, I would almost think that Abiathar spent the rest of his life wishing he'd been killed. Because think about it. Like, this is like one of the most backhanded compliments, right? It's like, the only reason I'm not killing you is because at one time you were a great man. But not anymore. Now, you're not a great man. Now you've become unqualified. You've turned and you oppose the Lord's anointed. But for a time, you were great. And because you were once great, I'll spare you. But now, get out of here. Like, that's harsh.
It's like the I'm not mad, just disappointed.
Well, exactly. That's what it is. It's like, I'm not mad, I'm just disappointed. Right? Even though he is mad, but he's not so mad he's going to kill him.
Yeah.
He's like, I'm ticked that you did all this stuff, but I respect you because of what you once were. And therefore, get out of here. You're not ministering as a priest anymore. That's harsh. But Abiathar deserves it, right? He opposed the Lord's anointed one. And so he's kicked out. He is defrocked. He is no longer a priest before God. And we read verse 27, so Solomon drove Abiathar away from being priest to Yahweh in order to fulfill the word of Yahweh, which he had spoken concerning the house of Eli in Shiloh. Sean, would you like to talk about that for a second?
I can try.
Okay.
Do y'all remember the word of Yahweh that he spoke to Eli? Do you remember where that was at?
That was in the beginning of 1 Samuel. I remember that.
Chapter 2. Where God basically foretold to Eli that that his house he was going to cut the strength of his house and it was going to be cut off from the Lord. And at this time there would be two priestly lines. So there was because Aaron had 4 sons, 2 of them died before they had kids, and so you had Ithamar and Eleazar, right? And so Eli was from Ithamar, whereas I don't remember.
Just the other guys.
Yeah, just the other guy. And so basically, God puts a curse on the house of Eli, which is Ithamar, the line of Ithamar. And so, at this time you had Abiathar and Zadok. Zadok was from the line of Eleazar, whereas Abiathar was from the line of Ithamar. And so with this kind of is like the end of the house of Eli, which God had foretold in 1 Samuel. And so from this point on, Zadok, the high priesthood basically is solely Zadok instead of Abiathar and Zadok.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think I mentioned this a few weeks ago, or maybe just last week, but Zadok is where we're going to eventually get the name Sadducees, right? Because basically Zadok becomes Saduk, right? Sadducees. And ultimately they are going to be the priestly line at the time of Jesus, right? And so Zadok, there's a continual priestly line all the way to the time of Jesus and stuff, and then it ends around AD 70 whenever the temple's destroyed. But yeah, so this really sets in motion this whole thing. And another thing that Sean pointed out to me that he read in a commentary is that this is the first time in the entire Bible that you encounter the words, in order to fulfill the word of Yahweh. So this is really one of the first times that you actually see prophecy directly being fulfilled explicitly in Scripture. Right? There might be other places where things come to pass, but this is the first time in the Bible where it explicitly says, hey, by the way, remember that prophecy? This fulfilled it. Because you've been waiting for that, right? Because way back in 1 Samuel, it said Eli's sons are going to, be destroyed. And they were, right? You had Ahimelech basically being destroyed, and then Abiathar was the one who escaped. But then now, even Abiathar, he's being destroyed in a different way. He's not being killed, but he's being kicked out of the priesthood, which is even worse, right? It's like you're unqualified now. Yikes. And so this fulfilled the word of God, and that prophecy has been fulfilled. God's promise came to pass. What began in 1 Samuel chapter 2 has now been completed in 1 Kings chapter 2. This story directly picks up where the last one left off. All right. Ooh. Long one.
Now the news came to Joab, for Joab had followed Adonijah, although he had not followed Absalom. And Joab fled to the town to the tent of Yahweh and took hold of the horns of the altar. And it was told to King Solomon that Joab had fled to the tent of Yahweh, and behold, he is beside the altar. Then Solomon sent Benaiah the son of Jehoiada, saying, Go, fall upon him. So Benaiah came to the tent of Yahweh and said to him, Thus the king has said, Come out. But he said, No, for I will die here. And Benaiah brought the king word again, saying, Thus spoke Joab, and thus he answered me. And the king said to him, Do as he has spoken, and fall upon him and bury him, that you may remove from me and from my father's house the blood which Joab shed without cause. And Yahweh will return his blood on his own head, because he fell upon 2 men more righteous better than he, and killed them with the sword. But my father David did not know it. Abner the son of Ner, commander of the army of Israel, and Amasa the son of Jether, commander of the army of Judah. So shall their blood return on the head of Joab, and on the head of his seed forever. But to David and his seed, and his house, and his throne, may there be peace from Yahweh forever. Then Benaiah the son of Jehoiada went up and fell upon him, and put him to death. And he was buried at his own house in the wilderness. And the king appointed Benaiah the son of Jehoiada over the army in his place, and the king appointed Zadok the priest in the place of Abiathar.
Very cool. Good riddance, Joab. I feel kind of bad for being so cold-hearted against Joab, but this dude had it coming, right? I mean, this guy. This is one of those places where you don't rejoice in death, but you do rejoice in justice.
Right.
And this guy, this needed to happen, right?
It was a long time coming.
It was a long time coming, right? I mean, this is stuff from the very beginning of David's reign. Joab was causing problems, but he was fiercely loyal, and he did his task, right? But this guy's been needing a taste of his own medicine. He has killed so much innocent blood that finally he needed to answer for his crimes. And I love how it's kind of a humorous story if you think about it, right? Just the way that this is, it almost feels like a cartoon where it's this back and forth where this Joab guy, right? He's the commander of the army. He's this tough dude who thinks that he just knows how everything should be run. He's this super macho guy, bloodthirsty. He's just reduced to this cowering and whimpering fool who's just begging for his life, right? It's really kind of humorous in a very dark way. So the news came to Joab, for Joab had followed Adonijah, although he had not followed Absalom. I feel like it's kind of an insult to Adonijah, right? It's almost like the author himself is surprised. He's for some odd reason, Joab followed Adonijah, even though he didn't even follow Absalom. Like, I don't know why anybody in the right mind would follow Adonijah, not Absalom. Like, of the two, Absalom was the better. But I think it's also a spit in the face of Joab, right? The idea is like, Joab, dude, like, at least you didn't support Absalom, but for some reason you supported Adonijah. And if you remember it, like, really, it just shows the hypocrisy in Joab, because Absalom and Adonijah were doing the same exact thing. But Joab's the one who killed Absalom, but he supports Adonijah? It shows that something shifted in Joab's allegiances, right? And once again, these are probably pretty close back to back. There was something that happened that made Joab defect to another side where he was willing to rebel against David. That's what the author's highlighting there. But I just also think it's just kind of embarrassing for poor Adonijah. This dude supported Absalom. He supported Adonijah, but didn't even support Absalom. Like, poor Absalom, like, Adonijah's rolling over in his grave, being like, I heard that. But Joab hears that Adonijah's been killed, and then he hears that Abiathar's been defrocked and is no longer a priest, and he's realizing, oh, crud. I ain't a priest, and I killed a lot of people, and I also rebelled against David, and I was the third person who was leading that whole thing. He's probably going to come after me next. And so we don't actually even see that Solomon takes the initiative here. Joab realizes, he puts things together. He's politically savvy, right? He's doing the math, and he says, Adonijah's dead. Abiathar's out. I think I need to go seek to protect my life. So Joab fled to the tent of Yahweh and took hold of the horns of the altar, right? This worked for Adonijah last time, right? Adonijah held the horns of the altar and he was forgiven. Please forgive me. This poor Joab, he's just like this. It's just embarrassing for him, right? Once again, just like Adonijah was running through the city, you can just imagine Joab doing this. Solomon hasn't even initiated anything. Solomon didn't initiate a manhunt. People just see Joab running through the streets, grabbing onto the altar. And it was told to King Solomon that Joab had fled to the tent of Yahweh, right? He hadn't initiated any of this. Solomon's just chilling on his throne, probably going about other stuff. And he hears about this, and he's like, oh, I guess we can handle this while we're here. It was told to King Solomon that Joab had fled to the tent of Yahweh, and behold, he is beside the altar. I love how halfway through that sentence, it just turns into the present tense. Once again, I just love little nuances like that in Hebrew where it just invites you into the story. And behold, he is beside the altar. Not he was beside it, right? It's right now. He's beside the altar. Then Solomon sent Benaiah the son of Jehoiada, saying, go fall on him. Right? You can tell Solomon's kind of done with this whole thing. He's like, all right. He's trying to replicate what Adonijah did because Adonijah got away with it. Joab, he's done too much. He does not deserve to get away with this. Just go kill him. Right? Just get it over with. So Benaiah came to the tent of Yahweh and said to him, thus the king has said, come out. So Benaiah is trying to be gracious here. Come out of here. I don't want to kill you in the tent of God. Don't make me do this. But he said, no, for I will die here. He just sounds like a little whiny brat, right? Like this super macho man who killed so many people in cold blood. He's just hanging on the altar. No, you're not getting me away from this altar. I'm not going anywhere. You wouldn't dare kill people in the tent of God, would you? And Benaiah's over here like, you want to watch me do it? I'll do whatever the king tells me to do. You think you're safe. You're not safe. Right? So Joab's like, no, I'm going to die right here. I'm going to die holding onto the altar because he's acting like it's I don't know, he's trying to be spiritually presumptive. I don't know. Joab I should probably be more compassionate towards Joab, but this dude just makes me mad.
It's not his best moment.
It's not his best moment at all. No. Yeah. No, for I will die here. And Benaiah brought the word to the king again, saying, thus spoke Joab, and thus he answered me. It seems like Benaiah's probably just entertained by it. Right? It's Benaiah's just the hitman. Joab, get out of here. Don't do this, man. You're embarrassing yourself. No, I'm not budging. I'm staying right here. You're going to have to come in here and kill me. Solomon, he says he's not moving. He says we're going to have to kill him there. Okay. The king said to him, do as he's spoken, and fall upon him and bury him, that you may remove from me and from my father's house the blood which Joab has shed without cause. Solomon's like, okay. I mean, Joab's probably thinking, surely Solomon would not kill me here. And Solomon's like, no, I mean, if he asked for it, I mean, Sure, I guess so. I mean,
That's what I've said.
What?
Thus you have said.
Yeah, that's what you said. I mean, yeah. I mean, you want to die there? I guess so. If you'd come out, we could have talked. But sure, let's kill him. I mean, I'm tired of you causing my family problems, and you've shed so much innocent blood, and I'm actually like notice what he says here, that you may remove from me and from my father's house the blood of which Joab shed without cause. So the idea is that if he does not punish Joab, then he and David will be held guilty for it. Right? Because David was gracious with Joab, but Solomon recognizes that this is a matter of justice. Right? You can't just be handing out grace freely without somebody bearing the punishment. Right? It's one thing for you to bear the punishment yourself, but if somebody goes and kills somebody with cold blood, you are actually being unjust by simply forgiving them. Right? Because now these people have caused immense suffering and you just let them go. No, somebody has to bear the brunt of that. And so Solomon's saying, right now, that guilt is on me and my household. Right? Because David chose to be gracious, and therefore we bear that guilt because we allowed this guilty man to go free. But if he wants to die, by all means, let him have the guilt. Like, he's asking for it, and that's what he deserves. And Yahweh will return his blood on his own head, because he fell upon 2 men more righteous and better than he, and killed them with the sword, but my father David did not know it. Right? He's not saying that David never knew about those events. He's pointing out that Joab did this without David's consent. Right? Because David was on good terms with both those guys. Abner had defected to David, and David said, come on. Like, David was gracious. He said, bygones be bygones, you can be my commander. Joab killed him. Amasa, same thing. Bygones be bygones, be my commander. David was a forgiving person. He showed hesed. He was willing to forgive. But then Abner went against David's instructions, and he went behind David's back and killed these guys. Abner the son of Ner, commander of the army of Israel, and Amasa the son of Jether, commander of the army of Judah. So he points out, this is like both sides of the camp, Israel and Judah. Joab is he's just a walking problem. He is opposed to everybody other than for himself. Like, he stands for only himself. So shall their blood return on the head of Joab and on the head of his seed forever. Right? So, you know what? I would gladly take the guilt off of me and my family and give it back to the person who actually deserves it. If he wants to die, let him die. But to David and his seed and his house and his throne, may there be shalom from Yahweh forever. Right? Once again, it's a play on his name. Right? Okay, we got this whole Davidic covenant thing. We don't need any guilt on us. Because if there's guilt on us, then things aren't going to go very well for the kingdom. So, because Solomon is a king who is establishing shalom, he's establishing peace, he says the way that we bring about peace is through violence in this instance. Because this guy deserves to die. This is capital punishment. Right? It's justice. Eye for eye, tooth for tooth. You killed innocent blood, and therefore your guilty blood shall be shed. That's how it is. Then Benaiah the son of Jehoiada went up and fell upon him and put him to death, and he was buried at his own house in the wilderness. Benaiah he's like, okay, I'll do it. So he just goes, I just love the back and forth of it. It's just like, Benaiah's like, okay, yes sir. And the king appointed Benaiah the son of Jehoiada over the army in his place, in the place of Joab, because remember Joab was the commander of David's army. And the king appointed Zadok the priest in the place of Abiathar. So now, basically what we see is that Solomon has established his second and third in command. Right? He is the king, he has a priest, he has a commander. There you go.
Then the king sent and called for Shimei and said to him, build for yourself a house in Jerusalem and live there, and do not go out from there to any place. Now it will be on the day that you go out and cross over the brook Kidron, that you will know for certain that you shall surely die. Your blood shall be on your own head. Shimei then said to the king, the word is good. As my lord the king has said, so your servant shall do. So Shimei lived in Jerusalem many days.
Perfect. All right. So Shimei, we talked about him. This is the guy who cast stones at David. This guy technically deserved to die. This is another guy that David told Solomon to take care of. Right? And so you see that Solomon's doing all the things that David said. He's taking David's advice, and he's doing it all in the name of God. So it seems to be giving affirmation to what David had requested. Right? It's saying, yeah, these are godly things. So now, next up is Shimei. It's almost like Solomon's had a list, and he's just checking them off. Right? Okay, we've addressed all these situations. Let's talk about Shimei. Shimei, get on in here. We need to talk. Technically, Shimei should be killed. Right? He cast stones at the Lord's anointed one. That's a capital offense. You literally were trying to kill the Lord's anointed one, and You were speaking curses over him the whole time. And then it wasn't until after David actually returned victorious that Shimei was like, oh, dude, I didn't mean that. My bad. I was just joking. No. You tried to kill him, right? You were throwing stones at him. It's not like he was just like being like they're not pebbles that he's throwing, right? He is trying to harm David, right? The Lord's anointed one. Trying to kill him. Assassination attempt. This dude should be killed. Instead, what Solomon's going to do is he's going to treat it like a case of manslaughter, right? Accidental manslaughter, to where rather than outright murder, it's a less punishable offense, right? And according to the law, what you could do in a case of manslaughter is that if you know anything about the how Israel was structured, the law demanded that they establish certain cities of refuge, right? And a city of refuge was basically a place where if somebody committed an offense that was accidental, right? If for some reason they accidentally killed somebody, right? Well, obviously somebody's going to be mad about it, and they're going to want vengeance. Well, they would have these certain cities that a person could flee to, but the issue is they're basically under house arrest in that city, right? To where you stay in that city, and if you leave, then the people can take vengeance on you. But if you stay in that city, they can't touch you, right? You are safe as long as you stay in that city. Jerusalem was not one of those cities, but that's kind of how Solomon's going to treat it right here, right? To where he says, Shimei, I should kill you. And my dad, he seemed to imply that's what I should have done. But instead what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a deal with you. Rather than trying you for murder, and rather than giving you a capital offense that demands death, we're going to act like that was accidental manslaughter. Jerusalem is now going to be your city of refuge. You're not allowed to leave, right? That might sound like a weird request, but it's just the demand, right? He's like, I could kill you, but I'm going to let you live. And you know what? I'm not going to exile you to some other place. You can stay right here in the capital city. I'd say that's being pretty gracious.
Yes, definitely.
Yeah. He's saying, stay here, but if you step foot out of Jerusalem, you're done, right? You have to abide by this. The king said, sent and called for Shimei and said to him, build for yourself a house in Jerusalem and live here. Because remember, he was living out over near the, like whenever David was escaping towards the Jordan River, he lived out there, right? He says, build for yourself a house in Jerusalem and live there, and do not go out from there to any place, right? So move in here to the city and build a house, right? He's probably even going to fund it, right? You know, I'll even fund this whole thing, build a house here, move here so I can keep my eyes on you. Now, it will be on the day that you go out and cross over the brook Kidron, right? You can think about the poetic justice behind this because Shimei cursed David shortly after we read about him crossing the brook Kidron. The Kidron Valley, that's outside Jerusalem, right? The Kidron Valley is the one that runs between Jerusalem and the Mount of Olives, right? So he says, remember how you cursed David whenever he crossed the brook Kidron? Okay, well, on the day when you cross over that brook, a curse is going to fall on you, right? That day you know for certain you shall die. So if you cross over, let you know, I will be the one who is avenging that blood. Your blood shall be on your head. And Shimei said to the king, the word is good, as my lord the king has said, so your servant will do. He says, okay, you know what, thank you. I imagine Shimei was really appreciative right here. Thank you so much, I appreciate it. So Shimei lived in Jerusalem for many days. Okay.
But it happened at the end of 3 years that two of the slaves of Shimei ran away to Achish son of Maacah, king of Gath. And they told Shimei, saying, behold, your slaves are in Gath. Then Shimei arose and saddled his donkey, and went to Gath to Achish to search for his slaves. And Shimei went and brought his slaves from Gath. And it was told to Solomon that Shimei had gone from Jerusalem to Gath and had returned. So the king sent and called for Shimei and said to him, did I not make you swear by Yahweh and solemnly warn you, saying, you will know for certain that on the day you go out and go anywhere, you shall surely die? And you said to me, the word which I have heard is good. Why then have you not kept the oath of Yahweh and the command which I have commanded you? The king also said to Shimei, you know all the evil which you acknowledge in your heart, which you did to my father David. Therefore Yahweh shall return your evil on your own head. The king Solomon shall be blessed, and the throne of David shall be established before Yahweh forever. So the king commanded Benaiah the son of Jehoiada, and he went out and fell upon him so that he died. Thus the kingdom was established in the hands of Solomon.
Man, Benaiah has heavy body count in this chapter.
Yeah.
And so here's the end of Shimei's story, right? Once again, we see this practice with Solomon, right? He tries to be gracious, and he gives people a lot of leeway. But if they push it too far, he will bring the hammer down. Which I think is a good... That's what a good king does. He doesn't immediately just punish everybody who does it wrong. He always gives them a chance. But if they keep abusing that, as the king, well, he's got a kingdom to... you have to realize that the things he's doing here, it's not just personal offenses, right? If somebody keeps sinning against you, it's not your job to punish them, right? You are not a king over a kingdom, right? You are just called to turn the other cheek, and you know what? They're going to keep sinning against you. That's okay. Be gracious. Forgive them 70 times 7. Solomon is in a different situation, right? He is not simply, he's not punishing these people because of personal offenses. He is punishing them because they are adversaries to the kingdom of God, right? And this is why it's different, whenever you read David's Psalms, and he's praying, God, I hope that you take my enemies and punch their teeth in and break them apart. He's not saying this because he just hates the people. He's saying this because he has a kingdom to care for, right? There's a difference, right? And there's justice that is demanded in a governmental sense, but there's also justice that is demanded in a personal sense. And biblically speaking, the justice that is demanded in a personal sense from Jesus' perspective is a justice that is a redemptive justice, where you actually engage in justice by taking that person's consequence upon yourself. Solomon, though, he is the Joshua of the situation, right? He's purging the evil from the midst of the people. That's what he's doing here. So it happened at the end of 3 years that 2 of the slaves of Shimei ran away to Achish, son of Maacah, king of Gath. We've mentioned Achish before. Do you remember when this was? It was in 1 Samuel. It's actually a very fitting end to this whole story.
He was the one David served, right?
Yes, so yeah. So Achish, this is the place where, it is the son, or it is the person that David served whenever he was fleeing from who?
Saul.
King Saul, right? And Shimei, once again, is... he's a relative of Saul, right? And so think about it. You've got slaves of Shimei running away to Achish. Just like David, a slave of Saul, ran to Achish, right? And so, just like Saul pursued David, so too Shimei is going to pursue his slaves to Achish. But ultimately, Saul pursuing David was the reason why Saul had to die, because he was opposing the Lord's anointed one, right? Same thing with Shimei, right? By Shimei pursuing his slaves, he isn't direct. It's not like the slaves were God's anointed one, but he's directly disobeying the commands of the Lord's anointed one, and so he's opposing the kingdom, right? It seems like such a small offense, but in the grand scheme of things, what we see is that Shimei is doing the exact same thing Saul did, and therefore he has to die. And ironically, this is going to bring an end to the story of the house of Saul, right? Saul's house is done after this, right? There's no more of it, right? Shimei is the last one. But it happened at the end of 3 years that 2 of the slaves of Shimei ran away to Achish, son of Maacah, king of Gath, and they told Shimei, saying, "Behold, your slaves are in Gath." Then Shimei arose and saddled his donkey and went to Gath to Achish to search for his slaves. And Shimei went and brought his slaves from Gath. So he successfully did it. Why did he do it? I don't know. Was he ungrateful? Had he forgotten? Did he just simply not take the command very seriously? Had he begun to think that Solomon was just super gracious and just wouldn't actually follow up? Maybe he thought that Solomon wasn't actually paying attention to him and that he could get away with it? I don't know. There's a number of reasons why Shimei could have done this.
Because again, it's been 3 years.
Yeah, it's been 3 years. I'm sure that was a temporary thing. It's probably forgotten by now. He probably doesn't even remember who I am. Oh no, he remembers. And so we don't know why Shimei did this. But apparently he valued his slaves and them being in his house more than he valued his own life. And honestly, if I'm saying anything, I have a feeling the slaves probably had a good reason to leave. Because this dude does not sound like a pleasant person to be around. So he goes and he retrieves the slaves who ironically had tried to seek shelter from the very same... it's ironic that both people flee from Saul's household and they go to the Philistines for help. Interesting. So Shimei went and brought his slaves from Gath, and it was told to Solomon that Shimei had gone from Jerusalem to Gath and had returned. Somebody snitched. We don't know who did it, but somebody told Solomon, remember that guy that you said to keep an eye on? Well, we kept an eye on him, and he walked through the Kidron Valley. In fact, he got a lot further than that. He went all the way to Gath. What was it? Was one of his family members in dire need? Was he trying to save somebody's life? No, he had some runaway slaves, and he just didn't want to go on living without them. Well, he ain't going to go on living at all. Right? So the king sent and called for Shimei. You know that Shimei, he was probably not having a good time when he was walking up to that palace that day. He's like, oh no, I've made a grave mistake. So the king sent and called for Shimei and said to him, did I not make you swear by Yahweh and solemnly swear? And solemnly warn you, saying, you will know for certain that on that day you go out and go anywhere, you shall surely die. And you said to me the words that I have heard that is good? He says, I remember this conversation like it was yesterday, my friend. And you agreed to it. It's not like I gave you a command and you never agreed. Even if you hadn't agreed, I'm still the king, you should listen. But you said it was good. This was a mutual thing, man. You agreed that we were on good terms here. And you broke it. Why then have you not kept the oath of Yahweh? Do you notice what he emphasizes there? It's not that you lied to me. It's that you took the Lord's name in vain. You swore in God's name and you broke that. That is unacceptable. In the command which I have commanded you. Right? I gave you a command. I, the Lord's anointed one, gave you a command. And you swore in the name of God that you would obey that command. You have disobeyed my command and you have taken the Lord's name in vain. Unacceptable. The king also said to Shimei. I like little phrases like that too. Just little things where it's like the dialogue could just keep going straight on, but instead like the author chooses to like intersperse it with like the king also said. Like it's almost like, oh, he's not done, right? It's like whenever the you're watching like the infomercials, but wait, there's more. You would think that Solomon would just end there, but he says, no, I'm not done yet. Don't walk away. The king also said to Shimei, you know all the evil which you acknowledge in your heart, which you did to my father David. Therefore Yahweh shall return your evil on your own head. This is interesting, right? It's like Solomon is looking at what Shimei did here. And he says, this is not a personal thing of me against you. I am not just like, this is not an act of vengeance where I am just killing you because I'm so mad at you. Rather, the fact that you disobeyed, despite the fact that I had been as gracious as possible, this tells me that Yahweh wants me to destroy you. Because apparently Yahweh thinks that David needs to be avenged. I was trying to be gracious. I was more than content to let you dwell in the city forever, and you could have died at an old age, but you chose to break the simple command that I gave you. All for nothing, right? You could have just let the slaves go, right? You chose to break this. And that tells me that God himself wants you to pay for the evil that you've done, right? All the evil which you've done to your heart, you know it. Like he's saying, I don't know the evil that's in your heart, but you know the evil that's in your heart. All the stuff you did against David, Yahweh's going to return that on your head, right? That's the consequences of your actions. But King Solomon, he's talking about himself. But King Solomon shall be blessed, and the throne of David shall be established before Yahweh forever. This is a really cool statement, because remember, based off how this chapter started, what is it that needs to happen in order for Solomon to be blessed and the throne of David to be established before Yahweh forever?
Follow God's commands.
Yes, Solomon needs to follow God's commands. So, if you're taking verse 45 in light of what we read earlier, what is Solomon saying about himself right here?
That he's following.
He's saying, I'm going to follow God's commands. My daddy told me in his dying breaths that I need to keep the statutes of Yahweh, and I need to follow his commands, and I need to walk in his ways. And he says that if I do that, I'll be blessed. And guess what, Shimei? I'm going to be blessed. So this is Solomon saying, I'm going to follow God. And you have violated that. You have opposed the Lord's anointed one. You have disobeyed God. You have taken his name in vain. You have broken so many commandments. And I am here to follow God's commandments. And therefore, as the anointed one, I cannot be gracious anymore. I've got to act as a king not as a friend. So as the king, I'm sorry, you're done. You are voted off the island. But King Solomon shall be blessed, and the throne of David shall be established before Yahweh forever. I also love the confidence that he speaks here. Right? This is like Psalm 23. Surely goodness and loving kindness will follow me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of the Lord forever. Solomon is identifying himself with the Davidic covenant and saying, that's going to be true. Dad told me that if I'm faithful, the kingdom will be established forever. Well, I can tell you right now, the Messiah is coming for us, because that kingdom is going to be established, because I'm going to be faithful to God. Unfortunately, Solomon's not going to totally stick to that, but for these first few chapters, he is. He's going to be really great. So the king commanded Benaiah, the son of Jehoiada, and he went and fell upon him so that he died. Thus the kingdom was established in the hands of Solomon. I love that it doesn't say, so Solomon established his kingdom. It says the kingdom was established in the hands of Solomon. Who's doing the establishing?
God.
God, right? I love that because you don't really see God directly intervening in these stories, but he's on the lips of the people talking. And the author is interpreting this for us. So the kingdom was established in the hands of Solomon. By who? It's by God. Right? Solomon, he is simply following in the ways of God, like David commanded him, and as a result, God is establishing him. Which leads us into what we're going to cover next week, the wisdom of King Solomon. God is seeing all these things that Solomon's going to do, and he's going to have this really important interaction with Solomon next week. It's going to be a really cool story that people, like, whenever you think of Solomon, it's probably one of the stories you think of. But before we wrap up real quick, is there any just general application y'all can think of? Because we really haven't talked about a whole lot of application. I tried to drop certain things in there. But just so we can wrap up, what's some application points?
If you keep your promise to Yahweh, keep it. Don't do it for your own schemes. If you made a promise to Yahweh, keep that promise.
Yeah. Be careful when you make a vow before God. Right?
Yes.
It's better to make... Solomon's going to say this too, right? In Ecclesiastes. It's better to make a vow and not keep it. Oh, no. It's better to not make... Wait, hold up. I'm about to quote this wrong. It's better to not make a vow than to make a vow and not keep it. That's what it is. I was about to say it's better to make a vow and not keep it. I'm like, nope, that's not what he says. But no, Solomon's going to make that point in Ecclesiastes. Right? It's better to not make a vow at all than to make one and not keep it. Because if you don't make a vow, well, then you're probably just being honest and saying, I don't know if I'm going to do this. Whereas if you make a vow and don't keep it, then you're lying to God and you're lying to others. Right? So if you're aware of your sinfulness, basically check yourself before you wreck yourself. Right? If you're aware of your sinfulness, don't overestimate your strength. But if you're ignorant of your weakness, don't overcommit yourself. So keep your promises both before God and man. And that's why both Jesus and James are, they say, let your yes be yes, your no be no. You shouldn't need to make oaths in the name of God. Not that that's inherently sinful, but you shouldn't need to do it. Just be an honest person. And then you don't have to make these huge commands.
Usually the people that I find make the most promises and swears like that are usually the ones who never hold anything.
Well, exactly, right? I promise you in the name of God. The fact that you had to say that tells me that you probably aren't going to actually do this.
Next time I'll
Yeah, next time I'll definitely be there. I mean, you always see that in the movies, like the parents are like, I'm definitely going to be at that talent show. I know I missed all of the other ones, but I'm going to be there. And you're like, yeah, they're not making it to that talent show. That's usually how it is. Whereas if you're just a trustworthy person, your word's all that they need. Yeah, I'll be there. Okay, cool. Yes?
I've heard people say, I swear by God, I swear to God in my life before. Is that
Well, we're saying there's nothing inherently wrong with that. Solomon himself made an oath in the name of God here. The point is, it's your character that matters, right? So whenever Jesus says don't make oaths, he's not saying that oaths are inherently sinful. He's saying don't be the type of person who needs to make an oath, right? I mean, sometimes an oath is necessary. Like whenever Solomon's doing it, he's saying, as Yahweh lives, he's just saying this is going to happen. Right? Whereas other people, sometimes they'll make big promises almost as a personal accountability, but it doesn't actually do anything. Right? Or they're just trying to impress people. Whereas he's saying, just be a man of honor to where whether you make an oath or not, people are going to trust you either way. And therefore, when you make an oath, they just know that you're taking it seriously. Whereas a lot of people, they'll just make empty oaths like Shimei. Oh, I swear in the name of God, I'm going to listen to what you say, Solomon. Okay. Sure.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. Anything else? All right, cool. Well, what I want to do is I'm going to close this off with another quote from that same commentary I was reading before, mainly because I think it's really cool. And so let's see here. So he's been talking about both the hesed and the violence that we see in this chapter, right? Both the blessing of Barzillai, but also the violence towards all the other people. Barzillai blessed the Lord's anointed and the true Abrahamic seed and receives a blessing. He fed David, and so his sons are fed, like David told Solomon to do. This provides a clue to the goal of Solomon's violent justice. Executing enemies is obviously not ultimately the aim of political action, nor is it designed merely to establish power and exercise control and maintain a degree of decent order. Enemies must be removed in order to open up space for a table. Fear must be eliminated in order to give place to joy. The boundaries of the kingdom must be secured so that the people of the kingdom can eat and drink and rejoice before the Lord. Solomon executes the enemies of the kingdom so that the friends of the kingdom can eat and drink in security, peace, and joy. For Solomon, as for Jesus, the table is the heart of the kingdom. Ultimately, what he's pointing out here is that Solomon isn't just killing these people left and right because he feels like it. He's doing it because he is trying to live true to his name. His name means peace. He is trying to establish peace. And in order to establish peace, unfortunately, that means that adversaries have to be destroyed, right? Because Solomon is thinking long term, right? People sometimes will think that peace is just ignoring problems. No, that's how chaos evolves, right? You can just ignore that, but then Solomon's going to end up like David, just cold and shivering in bed because of the hard life he lived. David tells Solomon, I don't want you to have to go through what I went through. I lived the life of hardship. You should be the king of peace. That's the name we gave you. Shlomo. Peace. Be a king of peace. And therefore, take out your enemies early so that your kingdom will not be a kingdom of warfare. It'll be a kingdom of peace. That's what Solomon's doing. So he's not just doing this because he hates these people and he just wants to be a jerk. He's doing it because he wants the people of God to thrive. And Jesus is going to do the same thing whenever he returns. It's going to be bloody. It's going to be terrifying. But it's because he's establishing the kingdom of God. Make sense? Cool. All right. Somebody close us out in prayer. Please.
I'll go ahead.
Go for it.
Dear Lord, thank you so much for what we learned in your word tonight. Help us to live a life of faith in you, God, and trusting that you have us and that our lives will be lived for you, and help us to live according to your word, and help the rest of the week to go well. In the name of Jesus Christ, I pray these things. Amen.
Amen.